Hello, welcome to our video on settlement agreements. My name is Samantha Randall and I'm an Associate Solicitor here at Palmer's in the Employment Department. So there may be occasions during an employment relationship when everything doesn't necessarily go to plan. And in some instances, it may be necessary to terminate the working relationship between employer and employee. In such circumstances, a settlement agreement can ensure that the parting of ways is on the best possible terms, avoiding costly and time-consuming employment disputes in the process. So what is a settlement agreement? A settlement agreement is a legally binding arrangement between an employer and an employee, which sets out the financial and other terms in which they will go their separate ways. In essence, such agreements include a severance payment made by the employer in return for the employee agreeing not to bring certain legal claims against the employer. There are various circumstances in which a settlement agreement may be proposed, including redundancy, mutual agreement, dismissal, and to settle an employment tribunal claim. So what is actually included in a settlement agreement? Now, the contents of each settlement agreement will vary depending on the circumstances of that case. However, where there are some elements which will be common to most agreements, which include the amount of compensation to be paid, such as payments for redundancy, unpaid wages, bonuses, payment in lieu of notice, and any holiday pay entitlement. Any restrictions on future employment, and the confidentiality requirements, which may permit the employee to tell people that they have entered into a settlement agreement, but not to discuss its contents, or may prohibit the employee from even mentioning that the settlement agreement has been put in place. They may also include any assurance given by the employer, any reference that will be provided upon request, and whether an announcement will be made to colleagues and clients. A mutual agreement that parties will not make any derogatory comments about one another is also quite common. Settlement agreements cannot be used to exclude liability for personal injury claims, but a carefully worded warranty can provide some protection. Despite having waived all claims, an employee who signs the agreement will still actually be able to bring some claims if the employer either breaches the contract, as well as any claims in respect of any accrued pension rights. So looking at the legality of settlement agreements. So to be a legally valid settlement agreement, it must comply with several conditions. These include that it must be in writing, it must relate to a particular complaint, the employee must have received independent legal advice from a relevant advisor, such as a solicitor, on the terms and the effect of the proposed agreement, and its effect on their ability to take a claim into a tribunal. The advisor must have a professional indemnity insurance to cover the risk of a claim by the employee in relation to the advice that was provided. And the agreement must state that the conditions regulating settlement agreements have been satisfied. So what are the financial implications of a settlement agreement? While it is a legal requirement that an employee sees a lawyer under Section 203 of the Employment Rights Act, as they are compromising several of their employment rights by signing the agreement, the employer is not actually under any obligation to contribute towards that employee's legal fees. However, it is in the employer's interest that the employee signs the agreement, and it is therefore common practice that a contribution will be made to cover the costs of the advice in relation to that agreement. Now, contributions usually range anywhere between £250 to £500 plus VAT, and or more, depending on the complexity of the agreement or the seniority of that particular employee. In general, the payments will be made to the employee in respect of any salary, holiday pay, notice pay, or bonus will be subject to tax and national insurance in the usual way. But employees may be entitled to receive a compensation or redundancy payment for their loss of employment, which will be tax-free up to the value of £30,000. Anything over £30,000 will be taxed accordingly. If the employee receives a tax-free compensation payment, then it is common for the employer to ask for an indemnity against the risk of HMRC, Revenue and Customs, deciding that the payment does not truly represent compensation and needs to be taxed. So what happens once the settlement agreement has been signed? So once it has been signed by the employee and they accept the terms as a full and final settlement of all of their claims. As a result, they waive their rights to bring employment-related claims against their employer in an employment tribunal, with the exception that their right to bring the following claims is preserved. A claim for breach of contract if the employer breaches the terms of the agreement, for personal injury where the injury was not caused by some form of discrimination, and it's not something that they could have reasonably known about at the time, and also claims in respect of their accrued pension rights. So what happens if an employee actually refuses to sign a settlement agreement? Whilst there is no legal obligation or otherwise on the employee to sign the settlement agreement, there might well be a financial implication of not doing so. Where the employee does not sign a settlement agreement, their employment will be terminated, with them receiving only what they're contractually or statutorily entitled to, rather than the full package on offer, depending on the circumstances. If the employee decides not to sign and instead pursue a claim against the employer at an employment tribunal, they will usually have a deadline of 3 months less 1 day from the date of termination to lodge their claim. However, if the employee decides not to sign the settlement agreement, they will not receive a contribution towards their legal fees, and so the employee will be liable for any fees given at that point. Thank you for watching.